What is your Tinder horror story? Story 1. I used to work as a bartender, so I'd hear plenty of wild stories. One regular shared a particularly awful one about a Tinder date she had. The date wasn't ideal, but not bad enough to stop her from bringing him home. He left the next morning and she brushed it off as a one-night stand. A few days later, her debit card got declined, which was odd since she was good with her money and typically had plenty of savings. Curious, she checked her account and saw numerous charges at places like Best Buy and Grubhub. Alarmed, she decided to check her credit card as well, only to find it was also riddled with unauthorized charges for streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and others. She tried to confront the guy, but his profile had disappeared. Luckily, she remembered they had a mutual friend on Facebook. She reached out to this mutual friend, who revealed that he had done the exact same thing to her. While I don't know how it all ended, the girl was furious. What started as a mediocre hookup quickly turned into a serious case of identity theft. Story 2. I once went on a date with a guy I didn't have much in common with, but I decided to give him a shot anyway. We met at a bar, and he'd already downed 2 pitchers of beer. Oddly, he seemed completely sober. We hung out and talked, but I wasn't really feeling a connection. When I said I wanted to leave, he convinced me to grab one more drink at a different bar since it was still early. Reluctantly, I agreed. At the next bar, we sat down near a couple that was making out. He turned to me and asked what I thought people would do if we started making out too. I tried to laugh it off and made a lighthearted comment about no one caring. He insisted we should try it. Feeling uncomfortable, I excused myself to the restroom. When I came back, he had ordered a shot for me, just for me, and insisted I take it. I declined, and he got visibly upset, saying he was ready to leave. At that point, he had consumed 2 pitchers of beer, 4 margaritas, and 2 pints, but showed no signs of intoxication. Concerned, I asked if he thought it was safe for him to drive. He became defensive and stormed off. Once I got home, I texted to make sure he got back safely, considering how much alcohol he'd consumed. His reply? I only date girls I sleep with on the first date. Safe to say I dodged a bullet with that one. Story 3. After a movie date with a guy I met on Tinder, we ended up back at my place. Let's call him Dude. I told him we could hang out for a bit, but I had work early in the morning and needed to go to bed soon. He agreed, but mentioned he was hungry and decided to order some food. Dude ordered 2 large subs and a milkshake, devoured them, and didn't bat an eye. I didn't think much of it at the time. Later, we fooled around and fell asleep. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my front door opening and closing repeatedly. My dogs were barking, so I got up to investigate. I walked out to find the bathroom light on and the door wide open. There, squatting over my toilet, was Dude, holding a stick and poking at a toilet bowl filled to the brim with murky brown water. Horrified, he shouted, "Stop looking at me! Go back to bed! I've got it under control!" Still half asleep, I couldn't process what was happening and just nervously laughed. He yelled, "Why don't you have a plunger?" I replied, "I've never needed one until now." He told me again to go back to bed, insisting he had it under control. Too disturbed and tired to argue, I went back to bed. Later, I heard him peek into my room saying, "I fixed it," before leaving and slamming the door behind him. The next morning, I hesitantly checked the bathroom. The water level in the toilet had gone down, but I noticed something sticking out. Upon closer inspection, it was a broken stick. Using gloves, towels, and BBQ tongs, I removed about 3 feet of broken sticks from the toilet. It all made sense. He'd been going outside to find sticks, breaking them, and trying again. The bathroom floor was covered in drips of toilet water, and he had left so quickly that he forgot his underwear, undershirt, and socks. After work, I went straight to the store and bought a plunger. Lesson learned. Story 4? This one's not about me, but my dad. And it's not Tinder, but Match.com. My dad had been on Match for about 3 months, and being a tall, decent-looking Australian man, he had garnered some attention. One weekend, he received his first ever unsolicited nude photo. He found it strange, but decided to brush it off. Later that week, the same woman sent him 6 more nudes. Before blocking her, he decided to open them out of curiosity. 5 of the pictures were poorly lit, unappealing close-ups of her private parts. However, the 6th picture was unique. In the photo, the woman stood in front of a mirror, wearing just a bra and winking with various herbs like basil, parsley, and thyme shoved into her bra. The caption? Spice rack. After laughing uncontrollably, my dad finally blocked her. Story 5. This happened when I had just started dating again, after a rough breakup from a 3-year relationship. At 12:45 a.m., I got a message from a Tinder match asking what I was up to. She then invited me to hang out. It felt a bit late, but I thought, why not? I'm single in my 20s, might as well take opportunities. She offered to pick me up, so I got ready. Put on cologne, a nice shirt, the works. When her car arrived, I noticed she was in the passenger seat while her friend was driving. A bit odd, but not completely unreasonable. I got in and asked which club we were going to. "We're not going out, just out," she replied. Feeling uneasy, I asked, "Where are we going?" "Just into town," she said. We ended up at a parking lot under a bridge. They cranked up the radio, started chatting about the most mundane topics, and barely included me in the conversation. Then the driver pulled out a giant bottle of chocolate milk and started drinking it. After about 15 minutes, they got out of the car to smoke. My Tinder match was wearing fluffy white slippers that lit up with every step. At that point, I decided I'd had enough. "I appreciate you picking me up, but this really isn't my scene. I'm going to head out. Have a good night." They were offended, but I didn't care. Story 6. A girl invited me to what she called a work party at her house and said it was BYOB. I brought a six-pack and headed over thinking it'd be a casual gathering. When I arrived, I noticed that most of the guests were teenagers, 17, 18 years old, even though the girl and I were both 21. Soon everyone was gathered in the living room, where the party turned into a pitch meeting for a pyramid scheme. The group leaders started telling sob stories and boasting about how much money they'd made, claiming they could help others earn millions in no time. At one point, he pointed to his BMW 3 Series outside and said it was a company car that anyone could earn if they worked hard enough. I sat there for 2 hours, the only one drinking, because I thought it'd be rude to leave during their stories. Finally, I'd had enough. When the girl asked what I thought of the presentation, I said, "It's not for me, I'm leaving." She asked if I wanted to take my beer, but I told her they needed it more than I did. Weeks later, she texted me asking if the group leader could call me to discuss why I wasn't interested. He did, and after repeatedly pushing me to join, I had to firmly tell him to back off. Looking back, I wish I'd stood up during the pitch, chugged my beer, and said, "This is nonsense, don't ruin your lives." But alas, that's just a daydream. Story 7. I've got one where I was the nightmare date. I met a girl from Tinder at a Cajun restaurant in Dallas. Before the date, I decided to try Kratom, a supplement I'd recently read about that supposedly makes you feel relaxed and euphoric. The first time I tried it, I didn't feel anything, so I figured I'd double the dose this time. I wrapped a large amount of kratom powder in deli meat and swallowed it before heading to the date. I felt fine until I sat down with her. Suddenly, I realized I was seconds away from violently vomiting. I excused myself, but as I walked toward the restroom, I started choking and spewing vomit everywhere. I covered my mouth with my hands, leaving a trail of vomit all the way to the bathroom. Once inside, I projectile vomited into the trash can and spent several minutes cleaning myself up. Mortified, I returned to the table and somehow survived the rest of the date, though I felt like the biggest idiot. Lesson learned: don't experiment with substances before a first date. Story 8. I matched with a girl and we started messaging. Later that night, we had a great phone conversation, and I asked her out for the next evening. She agreed, but then mentioned she had something to tell me. She was permanently in a wheelchair. At that moment, I felt stuck. Backing out would make me feel like a jerk, and leading her on wasn't right either. But I figured, why not? It's just a date, and it could still be fun. The next morning, she called me early and told me she was doing something crazy, but wouldn't say what. A few hours later, she sent me a photo, her wrist with my name tattooed on it. I was stunned and immediately told my friends about it. Despite my reservations, I decided to go on the date because I was curious about the tattoo and thought I should at least give it a chance. On the way to her place, I realized my car might not accommodate her wheelchair. Since I knew she drove, I asked if she could drive instead. When she pulled up, I got in her car and noticed it wasn't handicapped enabled. Instead, she used 2 crutches, one for the gas and one for the brake. We were driving on the Southern California freeways in traffic, and I was silently praying the entire time. During dinner, she got a call from her 10-year-old daughter, who was scared because she'd been left home alone. I suggested we go back, but she said, "It's fine." I gave her something to make her sleep. She'll be out soon. At that point, I decided to skip the movie and head back. On the drive home, she casually said, "Wow, I'm kind of drunk," after having only 1 drink. She refused to let me drive and floored it using her crutch to hit the gas. I said a few prayers, but we eventually made it back to her place in one piece. I helped her back to her door, said goodbye, and vowed never to see her again. For the record, the tattoo was real. Story 9. I matched with a cute girl a few years ago, and we went out for drinks. Things were going well, so we decided to grab a 6-pack and head to the beach to stargaze and make out. Somehow, we ended up on a stolen sailboat at 2 a.m. with her ex, an old drunken boat repairman who had stolen the boat by making copies of the keys, and her dog. After 30 minutes of arguing with her ex, she blacked out and fell asleep. Meanwhile, her dog was terrified, running around the boat and pooping everywhere. Her ex, tripping on acid, started yelling at me, telling me I had to take care of her and never hurt her. Then he ran to the bow of the boat to finish his trip. The old drunken boat thief? He was just chilling, drinking vodka straight from the bottle. I gave up, cleaned up after the dog, brought it inside the cabin, and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to her and her ex screaming at each other about some car crash. The old boat thief had disappeared, and I had no idea where I'd parked my car. I quietly left, grabbed some coffee and breakfast, and wandered the harbor until I found my car. I never spoke to her again, but I didn't delete Tinder either. Story 10. I matched with a guy, and we decided to meet halfway at a beach pier. Before the date, we'd been texting, and he seemed normal. When I got to the pier, he texted me saying he couldn't make it because his license was revoked. Instead, he asked me to meet him at a pizza place closer to him. I should have left then, but I didn't. When I arrived, I saw him and immediately realized his photos were 5 years old. He looked like a greasy, unkempt version of himself with holes in his shirt and messy hair. I awkwardly gave him a side hug and he said, "Oh no, we're not getting pizza. Let's go to the park." At the park, he pulled me onto his lap before I could sit down and said, "God, baby girl, you're so cute." I scooted away, trying to start a conversation, but he pulled out his phone and started texting. A few minutes later, he interrupted me, asking if I smoked. He suggested we go back to his place for a bowl, but I declined. "Aw, come on, baby girl, my place is right there. We could have some fun too," he said. When I declined again, he pulled me close by the face, whispered, "You're so innocent," and licked my face from chin to ear. I was so shocked I just sat there for a moment. Then I faked an urgent phone call and left. Story 11. It was my first time using dating apps in 4 years. I matched with a Chinese guy who seemed really nice, and his pictures made him look very handsome. We talked consistently for about a week, and I liked him a lot based on our conversations. When he asked me to meet up, I agreed. When we met, he looked nothing like his pictures. Later, I found out he had been using photos of Godfrey Gao instead of his own. He admitted he did it because he thought he was too ugly. I should have left then, but I didn't. We talked, and he suggested going for a walk in a park just down the road. I naively agreed. I got into his car, a huge mistake. And instead of going down the road, he drove 25-30 minutes to another city. He said there was a nice trail there, so I reluctantly went along. But instead of taking a walk, he parked and started kissing me. Then he began groping me. I was terrified. When I refused to get in the back seat, he dragged me out of the car and forced me into the back. I kept saying no, but he wouldn't stop. I'll never forget his words. "I've never been with a white girl before." He assaulted me, but I managed to fight him off, forced the door open, and grabbed my purse from the front seat. I ran down the road until I found a car with a high school girl inside. I begged her to pretend we were friends. She called 911 and let me into her car, locking the doors. The guy came looking for me, screaming for me to come back. But the girl convinced him we were best friends, and he left. The police arrived, took my statement, and helped me gather myself. I've never told anyone until now. At the time, I had just ended a 3-year relationship after catching my boyfriend in bed with my best friend. I guess I was looking to feel something or be seen as attractive. I learned my lesson. Always verify who you're meeting and be cautious. Story 12. This happened on Bumble, but here it is anyway. There was a guy I used to work with 2 years ago who I had a big crush on. He quit shortly after I started, but he'd occasionally come by to visit his sister who still worked there. A year ago, I found him on Bumble, and we matched. I made the first move, and we went on a date a week later. We hooked up that night, and he specifically asked me not to tell his sister. Afterward, he ghosted me, occasionally hitting me up for casual hookups, which I avoided because I wanted something serious. Fast forward a month, and I started seeing someone new who was interested in a serious relationship. When I told the first guy, he snapped, called me rude names, and claimed I wasn't special. Classic nice guy behavior. For 8 months, he would show up at my workplace to see if I was there, and he kept making fake accounts to message me. I blocked every one of them, but he wouldn't stop. Eventually, I told his sister what was going on, even though I was scared she might defend him. To my relief, she took my side. She even told their mom, and they both scolded him. After that, he finally left me alone. Story 13. I worked at a sushi restaurant during college. One night, during a busy dinner shift, an attractive guy and his friend came in. Despite the rush, I gave them great service, and they tipped extremely well. Later that night, I was relaxing at home, swiping through Tinder when I saw the same guy. He was hard to miss because of his distinctive tattoos and memorable tip. I swiped right, passed out, and woke up the next morning to see that we matched. He sent some sweet messages and we started texting. Turns out he was only in town for business, but he asked me out to dinner at a fancy French restaurant. My roommates encouraged me, with the help of mimosas, to go, so I agreed. He was oddly insistent on picking me up, but I refused and told him I'd cancel if I couldn't drive myself. He backed down and we met at the restaurant. The date started normal enough. He ordered a $200 bottle of wine, lobster, and an extravagant meal totaling around $600. As he drank more, he admitted he was married but claimed it was an open relationship. I didn't believe him, so he called his wife, showed her my picture, and put her on speaker. She confirmed everything and even suggested I join them for a threesome at their home in Cancun. I was overwhelmed with red flags and decided to leave. Before I could, he revealed he made his money through a drug cartel, claiming it was all safe. I excused myself and headed for my car, but he followed, trying to convince me to come to his hotel. He even showed me pictures of his wife, who was undeniably attractive. When I refused, he said I at least owed him something for spending so much on dinner and tried to force a kiss. I managed to get away, but I was terrified he might follow me home. I drove around for a while and ended up spending the night at a friend's house with male roommates, just in case. I deleted Tinder the next day and never looked back. In hindsight, I wonder if it was part of a human trafficking scheme. Either way, it was terrifying. Story 14. I went on a Tinder date a few months ago, around October, and it went really well. She was cute, had a job, and seemed sane. We hit it off and planned a second date. However, for the second date, she invited me to her Thanksgiving party to meet her friends and family. It felt too soon, but I didn't have other plans, so I agreed. My job for the party was to make jungle juice. I used my trusty college recipe: Everclear, Hawaiian Punch, lemonade powder, and ice. The drink was a hit, and everyone got drunk. Toward the end of the night, my date and her friends complimented the drink and mentioned they loved the fruit I'd added. That comment didn't sit well with me, so I went to investigate. Using a ladle, I scraped the bottom of the canister and found chunks of meat and pieces of ramen. That's when I realized someone had puked in the jungle juice. Story 15. During my sophomore year of college, I matched with a girl who was a junior or senior at the same school. The first time we hung out, we just watched Netflix at her place and got along really well. I thought we might have something special. We kept texting and planned to hang out again the following weekend. Out of nowhere, she started sending me unsolicited nudes. I hadn't asked for them, but as a young college guy, I wasn't complaining. When she came over to my apartment, she asked if she could stay the night. Given the context of the nudes, I assumed her intentions were clear. She asked me to sleep in the bed with her, so I knew things were on. We ended up hooking up, and I used a condom. Afterward, I tossed it to the side of the bed. A few minutes later, she got up, grabbed the condom, and ran to the bathroom. I heard a loud crash and her yell, "F!" Concerned, I asked if she was okay, but she didn't respond. I opened the bathroom door and saw her standing in my shower, one leg propped up, trying to shove the condom, flipped inside out, into herself. Shocked, I immediately closed the door. She came out a few moments later, embarrassed, and said she was leaving. I never heard from her again. Story 16. I went on a date with an Australian woman who had just moved to my city 2 weeks earlier and didn't know anyone. Our first date at a pub went fine. She talked a lot, but we got along. For the second date, she suggested a budget pub because she hadn't been paid yet. Afterwards, she wanted to see live music, so I took her to a cool venue about 30 minutes away. The band was great, but she annoyed everyone there, including the band's girlfriends. One even asked me, "Are you seeing the red flags yet?" Trying to salvage the night, I suggested we head back to our neighborhood. On the way, she wanted to stop at a popular Aussie-Kiwi hangout bar, but it was closed. A group of people invited us for drinks elsewhere, but she said, "I need a piss first." She insisted on peeing in an alley, so I stood guard. Then I heard something hit the ground. She said, "Oh, did I just shh?" "Nah, I don't think so." I turned around to see a fluorescent-colored splat of diarrhea on the ground. Panicked, she grabbed the plastic wrap from a CD she'd just bought and tried to clean herself. It wasn't absorbent, just smeared things around. I offered to call her a cab, but she declined and said we should go find those people to drink with. I declined, kissed her goodbye, and she walked off. I couldn't stop thinking about how those guys might have been in for a nasty surprise if she did find them. Story 17. I had a couple of interesting experiences with Match.com when I was single. The first guy seemed nice at first, but was a bit controlling. On the first date, he decided everything without asking my opinion. I figured maybe he just misread me, as some girls like dominant personalities, so I agreed to a second date. However, He refused to tell me where we were going other than London. When I explained I needed to know for safety and what to wear, he got upset and insisted I wear a dress, which I never do. When I refused, he became hostile, calling me a stuck-up B********* and a cock tease. I blocked him immediately. The second guy was just plain rude. During the date, I joked about having a big butt. I was upfront in my profile about being a UK size 14, 16. And he deadpan replied, "Yes, I noticed." He chewed gum the entire time and stuck it to a side plate for the waitress to clean. When we bumped into a drunken coworker of mine who enthusiastically praised me, he shrugged and turned his back on him. I ended the date early, and as I walked away, he tried to shoulder bump me but missed. I blocked and reported him to Match. Story 18. I matched with a girl and everything seemed to be going well. She invited me over, and one thing led to another. We ended up sleeping together. We agreed to keep seeing each other. A couple of days later, I got a call from a guy asking if I'd been with her. It turned out he was her boyfriend. Shocked, I apologized and explained that I had no idea she was in a relationship. He seemed calm and said it was okay. I immediately told the girl what had happened. About an hour later, I started receiving texts from the boyfriend, threatening to F me up with his friends. Confused, I asked what I'd done wrong. It turned out the girl had lied and told him I'd assaulted her. Furious, I called her and told her to tell the truth or I'd go to the police with our messages as proof. A few days later, the boyfriend apologized, saying she had finally admitted to lying. We both got played, and I haven't heard from either of them since. Story 19. I met a girl I thought I could marry. On our first date, we walked a nearby trail and had a great time. It started raining, and since my mom lived nearby, the girl suggested we go there. Surprisingly, it wasn't awkward at all. My mom liked her, and we all had dinner together. Later, when my mom went upstairs, the girl kissed me on the landing. The next time we met, we slept together. Everything seemed perfect. I had to go away for work for about a month, and she assured me it wasn't a problem. When I returned, we went on holiday together, and it was magical. I was completely in love with her. After the trip, I dropped her off at her stop on the train and said goodbye. That was the last time I saw her. She texted me later saying she needed space. I respected her wishes, but when I asked her out again after some time, she said she had moved on. We dated for 6 months, and I still don't know what I did wrong. I think about her every day. Story 20. A friend of mine from the military had a horrifying Tinder experience. She chatted with a guy for a few days, and everything seemed normal. He invited her to a bar for drinks, and there were no red flags at first. During the date, the questions started getting unusually personal, like, what are your childhood traumas, and what's your first S memory? Despite this, he seemed charming, and she decided to go back to his place. While she was in the bathroom, she heard strange noises. Peeking into the room, she saw him covering the walls and floors with plastic sheets. She immediately excused herself and left, calling the police. The authorities later confirmed he was a potential serial killer in the making. My friend is still deeply shaken by the experience. Story 21. The first red flag was that he didn't look much like his photos. He had clearly gained a good amount of weight since they were taken. Still, I decided not to judge him for that alone. As soon as we started talking, he brought up his ex-wife. Oddly, he kept referring to her as his wife, in the present tense. I had to clarify multiple times to ensure they were actually divorced. Despite this strange behavior, we got along well, and I was having a good time. Eventually, he rolled up his sleeves to show me his arms, which were covered in gnarly track marks. He told me he'd been clean for 6 months, but admitted to a history of severe addiction, including multiple overdoses. I knew I wouldn't see him again, but I ended up going back to his place anyway. While there, he mentioned that he kept Hero stashed away, just in case. I convinced him to flush it, which he reluctantly did. He texted me the next morning, thanking me profusely. It was a wild experience, but I'm glad I was able to help in a small way. Story 22. I matched with a super cute girl on Tinder, and after a few days of messaging, we made plans for dinner. She told me to look for a woman in a red dress, so I was pretty nervous, but also excited. I double-checked everything before heading out. Hair, breath, teeth, even condoms, just in case. When I arrived at the restaurant, I started looking for her. The hostess offered to seat me, but I declined, saying, "My date is waiting for me." After searching, I turned a corner and saw a table full of my friends laughing and recording my reaction. I realized I'd been catfished by my own boys. At the time, I was traumatized, but they bought me a beer and we laughed about it. Story 23. I went on a great dinner date with a guy. He was interesting. We had good conversation, and I felt like he might be looking for something serious. We didn't hook up immediately, which made me feel hopeful. For our second date, we planned a hike. I offered to drive and picked him up, but he seemed different. He barely spoke and was glued to his phone the entire ride, which was super annoying. At the waterfall, things got a bit more physical. We kissed, and I was ready to take things to the next level. He invited me back to his place, and I agreed. When we got there, I noticed 10-15 opened condom wrappers on his bedside table with more in the trash. I don't know why, but I still hooked up with him. The S wasn't even worth it. Afterward, he immediately went back to his phone, and I made an excuse to leave. I later texted him, saying I wasn't in the right headspace to date but would be open to being friends. He left me on read. A month later, he replied, accusing me of taking advantage of him and trying to guilt trip me. I called him out for being rude on the date and for the disgusting state of his room. He left me on read again, and I never heard from him after that. Story 24. A couple of years ago, I got hardcore catfished on Tinder. The girl's photos weren't just edited. They didn't seem to be of her at all. We matched, and the conversation quickly turned to her inviting me over to watch movies. I agreed, got her address, and drove about 15 minutes to her apartment complex. When I arrived, a very large, unkempt woman in pajama clothes opened the door. At first, I thought she might just be a roommate or friend, but then she said, "How was the drive?" That's when it hit me. This was my Tinder date. Still in denial, I followed her into the apartment, which was a disaster. Empty pizza boxes, Coke bottles, and dirty laundry everywhere. I stayed for about 10 minutes out of politeness, but when she said, "You want to go lay down?" I made an excuse about needing to eat lunch and left. It was awkward and embarrassing, but I learned to be more cautious about who I meet online. Story 25. Back in 2012, I tried online dating for the first time and signed up for Plenty of Fish early on a Sunday morning. Almost immediately, I got a bunch of messages. One of them stood out, a 31-year-old lawyer with no kids and never married. She said my profile made me seem fun and nice and asked if I'd like to go to church with her that morning. I wasn't too keen on church for a first date, so I suggested meeting for brunch and a walk afterward. She agreed and gave me her address, asking me to pick her up at noon. When I arrived, I realized the address was for a sober care treatment center. Confused, I assumed she might have a client there. I messaged her that I was outside, and she came out looking nothing like her profile pictures. She was wearing a skirt so short I could see her underwear, high heels, and had visible hickeys on her neck. Still processing the situation, she got into my car and immediately asked, "Can I suck your D*******"? Stunned, I replied, "No, I don't even know you." Things quickly escalated as she begged me for $40, flashed me, and even pulled out a bag of used panties from her purse trying to sell them to me. At that point, I almost had to call the cops to get her out of my car. It was one of the most bizarre experiences of my life. Story 26. I went to pick up a date, and as soon as she opened the door, she asked me to take her dog out to poop while she took care of some things. Being a dog lover, I didn't mind and took the dog outside. A few minutes later, she came outside, jumped on my back playfully, kissed my cheek, and thanked me. This was all within 5 minutes of meeting her. After putting the dog back in her apartment, we went out for ice cream and started talking. Things were going fine until she got a call from her landlord. Her mood shifted, and when I asked what was wrong, she told me her divorce had been finalized the week before, and she was being forced to move to a new apartment across the parking lot. She started oversharing her entire life story, treating me like her therapist. Then she gave me a look, clearly expecting me to offer to help her move. I didn't take the bait. After finishing our ice cream, I dropped her off and left. Later that night, she messaged me, thanking me for the date, but again asking for help with her move. I told her I'd see what I could do and never talk to her again. Story 27. I matched with a girl on Tinder who I recognized from a mutual friend's Instagram. We chatted for a few days and decided to meet up after my shift at work. The plan was simple: smoke a joint and walk around. Things started off fine, but out of nowhere she began throwing up. I patted her back and told her not to be embarrassed, but I was super confused. After she finished, she admitted she'd been drinking all day and was still semi-wasted when we met up. I called her an Uber and walked her to the car. As she got in, she asked, "So are you coming?" I politely declined and went home, feeling completely turned off. Later, I called my best friend and told him about the whole weird experience. Bonus memory. I worked at a fast casual restaurant and noticed a girl I had previously matched with on Tinder eating there with a friend. We never met in person, so she didn't recognize me. While cleaning a table nearby, I overheard her telling her friend how she gave someone chlamydia. I've never felt more relieved about dodging a bullet in my life. Story 28. I matched with a girl who seemed super cute and fun. She was a psych major at a university near my house, so we planned to hang out and watch a movie. When her friend dropped her off, I went to meet her and noticed her friend had a look of pure horror. The girl, while matching her photos, had completely shaved her head. As we walked to my house, she kept randomly blurting out words like beef, taco, socks, and meow in the middle of our conversations. When I asked about her shaved head, she casually said, "I just felt like cutting it." At my house, she sat far away on the couch, oscillating between bursts of energy and complete silence. Suddenly, she said, "I'm going to have a seizure. I need to go to the taco hospital." Concerned, I offered to drive her, but she laughed and said she'd call her friend. I walked her out, she said, "Bye, meow," and left. Before I could block her, she blocked me. Curious, I later found her Instagram, which had 10 followers and a bio that read, "All my friends call me Squiggly." To this day, I have no idea what happened. Story 29. I met a girl named Sonia, and our date started with dinner near her house, followed by drinks and hanging out at her place. During the evening, she casually mentioned having a stalker, but I didn't think much of it. After drinking too much to drive, I stayed over on her couch, planning to grab breakfast with her the next morning. At around 6 a.m., as we were leaving, she mentioned that her stalker had texted her, saying he'd be there in 5 minutes. It sounded odd to me. Who announces themselves like that? As I got into my car, a minivan pulled up and blocked me in. The guy rolled down his window and yelled, "But I said I loved you!" Sonia apologized, explaining he was an ex she wasn't serious about. I tried to brush it off and drove away, taking a different route to avoid him, but he followed us. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot to see if I could lose him, but he matched my route exactly. At a red light, he pulled up next to us, yelling for Sonia to roll down her window. She refused. I made an illegal U-turn, hoping to escape, but he copied my move. He started revving his engine and pretending to ram my car, slamming on the brakes just before hitting me. It was terrifying. I asked Sonia if he was dangerous or armed, but she didn't know. Sonia called the police and they advised us to drive to the station, which was nearby. The guy followed us the entire way but drove off as we pulled into the station. After waiting at the station for a while, we decided to go to breakfast. I couldn't eat much because my nerves were shot, but Sonia paid. I reluctantly dropped her back home, where the police were waiting. Needless to say, things didn't work out with Sonia. Story 30. A few years ago, I matched with an older guy on Tinder. He was 45 and I was 25. We went for coffee and the conversation flowed naturally. He invited me back to his place to vape with his volcano and maybe fool around. He was hot, cool, and generous with his weed, so I agreed. After we hooked up, we were chilling on the couch when there was a knock at the door. He looked confused and got up to answer. Standing at the door was a cute guy around my age. They had a brief conversation I couldn't hear, and then the guy left. When my date came back, I raised an eyebrow. He casually told me it was his son's best friend, whom he'd been hooking up with since the friend was 21. He admitted he often had flings with younger guys, especially those seeking support or guidance. He wasn't creepy or predatory about it, though. He genuinely seemed to care about helping people, especially those struggling with their S or dealing with difficult family situations. He was well-off, worldly, and one of the most generous lovers I'd ever met. We hung out a few more times before I moved out of state. A year and a half later, I visited and met him for coffee. He looked rough, like he'd aged significantly. That's when he told me he had acute leukemia and didn't have much time left. Despite his physical decline, he spoke positively about his life, his amazing son, and the support system around him. He passed away shortly after, surrounded by friends and family. He was a beautiful, kind soul, and I'll always remember him fondly. Story 31. I matched with a girl on Bumble, and our date started off well enough. We went back to her place, and she told me I didn't have to wear a condom. Ignoring my inner voice screaming bad idea, I went along with it. Things got weird quickly. She was overly exaggerated, trying to act like a real-life porn star. Her movements were so aggressive they actually hurt, and the loud, unrealistic moaning and shouting harder just added to the awkwardness. I decided to power through and finish as quickly as possible. When I told her I was close, she yelled, "Come in me and get me pregnant, Daddy," and locked her legs around me. I panicked and tried to pull away, but it was too late. Shocked and angry, I demanded we go to CVS for a plan B. She argued, claiming it was her body and her decision. She even admitted she was using Tinder hookups as a cheap alternative to a sperm donor, because she wanted a baby before turning 30. I explained that this was not okay and that consent works both ways. After hours of arguing, I finally convinced her to take the pill. She begrudgingly came with me to the pharmacy, but I left knowing I'd never use dating apps again. Story 32. The first guy I met on Tinder asked me to meet him at a bar in LA. As I walked to the bar, he called me to say I was a minute late and that he'd already left. Confused, I turned around only for him to laugh and say, "Just kidding, I see you." I looked ahead and saw him standing outside the bar, waving. He was wearing a tie-dye tank top, red basketball shorts, a Bubba Gump trucker hat, and bright red and blue Jordans at a nice wine bar in Beverly Hills. As soon as we sat down, he asked me what I wanted to drink. I said anything but rosé. When the waitress came, he immediately ordered me a rosé. I let it slide, thinking maybe he misheard me. He told me he was a criminal defense attorney and asked if his friend could join us briefly. I didn't care since I already planned to leave soon. After paying the check, he suggested we head to Wolfgang Puck next door, where his friend would meet us. Once there, he revealed his friend was actually one of his clients, someone he openly admitted was guilty. I started feeling uneasy. When his friend arrived, he brought along a girl. While the guys went outside to smoke, the girl confided in me that she'd just had unprotected sex with the guy in a car before they came in, and that he'd told her afterward that he had herpes. She asked me if being on birth control would prevent herpes. I explained that it wouldn't, and she looked horrified. When the guys returned, they started loudly harassing a nearby couple, an older man and a younger woman. The friend yelled, "How much do you think he paid for her?" while my date laughed uncontrollably. The friend then tried to approach the couple directly, but the bartender intervened, telling him to back off. I'd had enough. I got up to leave, and as I walked out, my date muttered, "That's what I figured. You'd just leave." I didn't look back. By the time I reached my car, I deleted Tinder. All of that chaos happened in the span of 1 hour. Story 33. Part 1. The high school reunion disaster. I matched with a guy I knew from middle and high school. Normally, I'd never go straight to someone's house from a dating app, but since I already knew him, I figured it'd be fine. I drove 30 minutes to his place, fully aware of where the night was heading and okay with it. When I arrived, we started drinking, and he kept encouraging me to take more shots, saying I needed to catch up. I thought it was weird, but I went along with it. We hooked up, and afterward, as I was laying in bed, he casually said, "You should probably go." I was shocked. I'd driven all this way, he got me drunk, and now he expected me to leave? I pointed out I couldn't safely drive home, but he said he just liked sleeping alone. We argued, and I offered to sleep on the couch instead. He refused. Sarcastically, I said, "I guess I'll just sleep in my car then." To my disbelief, he thought that was a reasonable idea. So I spent hours in my car in 40-degree rain until I sobered up enough to drive home. Part 2. The sketchy Bumble guy. The second disaster came courtesy of a Bumble match. He only gave me his initials, never his full name, which was already a red flag. His messages were oddly written, no punctuation and some backhanded comments, but I brushed it off as awkwardness. We met at a bar after my evening shift. Before I even arrived, he sent multiple texts asking where I was, even though I'd already told him I was looking for parking. When I walked in, he immediately put his arm around me and tried to kiss me, completely invading my space. Over the course of the night, he kept assuring me, unprompted, that he wasn't a rapist. This happened 3 separate times. He also said that if I couldn't drive home, I could sleep in my car, and he'd make sure my doors were locked to keep me safe. He kept ordering me drinks I didn't want. One rum and coke he brought back himself. I pretended to sip before taking it to the bartender to switch for plain coke. Later, he brought me an AMF after I'd already told him I was done drinking. Thankfully, this one came straight from the bartender, so I took a few sips to be polite. We ended up playing pool with another guy and a girl, and while I was chatting with the girl, he missed a shot. Out of nowhere, he yelled, "F this! This is Bull's asterisk, asterisk, asterisk," and slammed his pool cue onto the table. He then stormed off to sulk in the corner for the rest of the night. I stayed and chatted with the girl for a bit longer before slipping out without saying goodbye. The next day, he messaged me, "Last night was fun." Before I could reply and tell him it absolutely wasn't, he unmatched me within 20 minutes. Story 35. We matched on a dating app, and he seemed interested right away, calling me cute and asking about my size. I told him my height and weight, and he replied with, "That's so hot." Things quickly took a turn. He asked who I lived with, and when I told him I lived alone, he said he had roommates and wanted to come over to my place. I told him I only meet people in public first, and made it clear I wasn't comfortable having strangers at my home. We continued texting for a week, and I suggested meeting at a coffee shop at noon on Friday. He kept pushing to meet at my apartment instead. I asked him to pick a coffee shop if my choice didn't work for him, but he kept joking about coming to my place. By Friday morning, I hadn't heard from him and realized I didn't want to meet him at all. Something felt off. Being openly trans on my profile, I'm aware people might target me for assault. His fixation on my size, living situation, and repeated insistence on meeting at my home set off alarms. Later, I saw a flurry of messages from him claiming the app wasn't letting him text earlier and that he still wanted to meet. But again, only at my apartment. That sealed it for me. I told him I wasn't interested anymore, blocked him, and deleted the app. Story 36. This girl and I went on 2 dates, and the second was unforgettable in the most bizarre way possible. She revealed she identified as a 4-year-old in some sort of age play role. While I tried to wrap my head around that, she also confessed she was still obsessed with her ex and claimed she had been raped many, many times, describing the details excessively. It felt too extreme to be true, but I didn't want to dismiss her claims outright. At some point, we ended up at a relative's house, and I realized she was already very drunk despite only having a few drinks. That's when the Sweeney Todd saga began. She launched into an impassioned, drunken rant about how Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street, was the greatest play ever created. It was both captivating and surreal. The people around us, clearly familiar with her fixation, looked exhausted, like they had endured this performance countless times. I stayed, sipping my drink as she continued her chaotic monologue, reciting the entire play from memory. She took on every character, slurred her words, stumbled around, and eventually stripped down to almost nothing by the time she finished. Despite the absurdity, I couldn't look away. It was like watching a train wreck, except the train was passionately, drunkenly performing a Broadway show. The neighbors shouted, dogs barked, and I questioned whether I was dreaming. When she finished, I clapped and told her to take a bow. She toppled over mid-bow, crawled toward me, and tried to initiate a yes encounter. I laughed, carried her inside, and put her on the couch. Without saying goodbye, I left, knowing she wouldn't remember any of it. Wherever you are, Michaela, I hope you found your daddy in some peace. You're one of the most eccentric people I've ever met. Blessed be the mad ones. Story 37. My first and only Tinder girlfriend turned out to be the meanest and most toxic person I've ever been with. We were together for 3.5 years, and I just recently managed to end the relationship. Throughout those years, I endured physical, verbal, and emotional abuse. I suspect she might have had a personality disorder, though she grew up in a terrible home environment, which I tried to help her escape. I worked hard to support her, helping her with things she said she wanted to improve in her life. Despite my efforts, she constantly broke me down to the point where I lost touch with who I was. She left 2.5 weeks ago, packing up her things while I was at work. She lied about when she would leave, but in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't have to watch her go. It was like ripping off a Band-Aid, painful but quick. Since then, I've been trying to heal, though it hasn't been easy. I blocked her on all social media and haven't heard from her since she supposedly moved back to Ohio. I didn't block her number in case something important comes up, but I'm hoping I'll never need to hear from her again. This relationship left me with what feels like PTSD. The healing process is rough, especially with the added difficulty of being stuck indoors 24/7 due to the pandemic. She was a nightmare, truly sent by the devil. Story 38. I started dating this girl who seemed like the perfect catch, curly blonde hair, into bodybuilding, and definitely my type. She was a senior, and I was a junior in college. We had been going out to bars together, and she mentioned she'd never thrown up from drinking. One night, we both got blackout drunk. We went back to my place and passed out in my bed. I vaguely remember waking up to the sound of liquid splattering. She wasn't in bed anymore, and I assumed she was puking in the trash bin. The next morning, we were both extremely hungover. When I asked if she had thrown up, she said no, which was odd. I assumed she just didn't remember. After she left, I checked the trash bin, but there was no puke. I searched my room and found no trace of anything. Over the next week, a weird, terrible smell kept popping up in my room. It would come and go, and I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. I searched everywhere, but nothing turned up. A week later, I found the source. She had left a couple of number 2s and some number 1 in one of my clothes drawers, a drawer I rarely used. The clothes were stained and ruined, and I had to disinfect the drawer with a hose and cleaning supplies. I thought it was bizarre, but also figured we could laugh it off. I texted her saying, "Hey, I think you went in my clothes drawer that night." She replied, "BTF? You're joking." I said, "No, haha, you definitely did." I never heard from her again. Story 39. I matched with a guy in a major city, 2-3 hours away while passing through. Despite the distance, we hit it off through texting. He was intelligent and charismatic. After a month of talking, we decided to meet, and he planned a full-day date starting with coffee. At first, he seemed likable but slightly disinterested. He kept looking around the room, barely listening to my answers to his questions. Then he asked if I was religious or spiritual. As I started answering, he suddenly made intense eye contact, interrupted me, and said, "I'm sure there are some things you're not at liberty to talk about." I awkwardly laughed and continued, but he repeated the phrase verbatim. Confused, I asked, "What do you mean by that?" He then launched into a bizarre story about his awakening, where his best friend's face melted off to reveal he was an alien lizard in disguise. He claimed this gave him the sight to identify other lizard people. Trying to steer the conversation away from this madness, I pointed to a TV showing a national tragedy and said, "This is so terrible." He responded, "Yeah, it's crazy that 3 out of the 4 anchors are actually lizards and no one knows." At this point, I assumed he was joking, so I sarcastically said, "Yeah, definitely the guy in the blue tie, right?" Big mistake. His face lit up, and he exclaimed, "You can tell?" He then accused me of being an alien lizard and began yelling at me so intensely that he was spitting. I left immediately. Story 40. This happened on Bumble, and it's by far my worst experience. I had added a lot of guys on Snapchat from Bumble since I wasn't looking for anything serious. One day, a guy messaged me asking to hang out. I declined because I was with someone else, but he went off ranting about how girls play games and don't want real relationships. I ignored him and moved on. The next day, I posted on my story asking if anyone wanted to go to the park. He messaged me again, but I'd forgotten who he was. We ended up meeting at the park, and the date went surprisingly well. As it got late, I told him I had to leave for a school project. He insisted on taking me out to dinner. I declined, but he kept pressing until I gave in, figuring it was a free meal. After dinner, he followed me to campus, waited until I was done, and took me to Texas Roadhouse. During dinner, he unloaded a ton of baggage about his hostile divorce, military service in Iraq, and recovery from a severe injury. His tone was bitter, especially when discussing his ex-wife, which should have been a red flag. Mid-dinner, another guy I'd previously gone on a date with stormed into the restaurant, drunk, apologizing for not being good enough for me. After the chaos, my date and I left and talked in his car. We started dating, but things got dark. After 6 months, my grandfather passed away and I flew to California for the funeral. On the day of the funeral, I noticed he had blocked me on all social media. Through a friend, I discovered he was with another girl. We broke up, but the story didn't end there. When I got home, the police contacted me. He was a registered S-offender who had raped his 11-year-old niece and was under investigation for selling drugs to high schoolers. Story 41. I matched with a girl on Tinder, and we instantly connected. We skipped small talk and dove into meaningful conversations, eventually exchanging numbers and even talking dirty. She lived 50 miles away, so we agreed to meet halfway. I was excited. She was attractive, funny, and smart, and we had made our mutual interest clear. When we met, I made small talk out of nerves and asked where she was from. She said Deckerville, a small town I knew well because I had family there. I mentioned my family and asked if she knew them. Her face went pale. She then revealed that her grandfather's last name was the same as mine. After a few more questions, we realized we were related. We were horrified, knowing everything we'd said and done leading up to the date. We agreed never to tell our families. This experience taught me the importance of small talk. Story 42. I matched with a girl on Tinder who we'll call Jen. She seemed nice, laughed at my humor, used proper grammar, and was straightforward about wanting to meet up. I suggested a wine bar, and she enthusiastically agreed. When we met, she was even more stunning in person, a reverse catfish. She radiated a confident, professional vibe, like someone still excited to conquer the world. But as soon as she saw me, her demeanor softened into a bright, genuine smile that gave me butterflies. We hugged, and her perfume was intoxicating. I had this fleeting daydream of us lounging in bed, post-intimacy, like a perfect Hollywood scene. Things were off to a promising start. We sat down, exchanged small talk, and ordered drinks. I went for a glass of red wine, and Jen ordered a Riesling. She seemed eager to dive into conversation, leaning forward with enthusiasm as we talked about work, the chaos of the MTA, and other casual topics. When it came time to order food, I chose a duck confit salad. That's when the mood shifted. Jen seemed to choke on her wine and stared at me with a mix of confusion and disdain. Then out of nowhere, she exclaimed loudly, "A salad?" Her voice carried across the restaurant, and even the server paused. I awkwardly replied, "It's got duck in it," as though that would somehow redeem my choice. She looked horrified and said, "Do you know how that will make me look as I'm shoveling braised pork into my mouth?" The server quickly disappeared, leaving me alone to navigate this disaster. Thinking I could diffuse the situation, I asked, "Is this a body image thing?" As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Jen exploded, hurling expletives like asshole and F you, while accusing me of making her feel like a pig. I tried to apologize and offered to change my order, but it only made things worse. She interrupted with, "Did you just say silly?" I braced for her to throw her wine at me, but instead she grabbed her bag, gave me the finger, and stormed out, yelling, "F you!" The entire restaurant fell silent, save for one guy trying not to laugh as his date hissed, "OMG, stop! That's not funny!" Meanwhile, Jen kicked a chair on her way out, probably breaking her toe, and screamed again in pain. I sat there stunned. The server came over cautiously, and I simply smiled and said, "I'll stick with the duck confit salad." The salad was amazing, by the way. I enjoyed her Riesling as well, tipped the server generously, and left the restaurant wondering if Jen had been serious or if she was messing with me. Either way, she unmatched me that night, and the whole ordeal ended there. Story 43. I went on a date that started off normal enough. Dinner at Carrabba's and a movie. I ordered seafood pasta, and everything seemed fine until about 5 minutes before the movie ended. That's when I felt a sudden, intense rumble in my stomach. I barely made it to the restroom, where I looked at myself in the mirror, panicked, before projectile vomiting pasta chunks all over the mirror and sink. Gasping, I stumbled into a stall and continued throwing up everywhere. A mother and daughter walked in, and the mom's horrified, "Oh my God," made me realize just how bad it was. After trying to clean up as best I could, I left the restroom only to find my date waiting for me. He asked if I wanted to go back to his apartment to hang out. Thinking the worst was over, I said yes. When we got to his apartment, he warned me it might be messy. That was an understatement. His dog had broken 3 potted plants and dirt was scattered everywhere. We cleaned up, cuddled, and watched The Office. I thought I was in the clear. I wasn't. The uneasy feeling returned, and I barely made it to the toilet before vomiting again. I cleaned up and went back out, but by then, I was mortified. We went to sleep, but around 5 or 6 a.m., we woke up to the sound of his dog retching. As the dog threw up on the carpet, all I could think was, "You too, bud?" My date cleaned it up, and we went back to bed. The next morning, we got a little frisky. Things were going well, until he suddenly screamed. Alarmed, I stopped and asked if he was okay. He wasn't. He said, "I think I broke my D. We have to go to the ER." I panicked, apologized profusely, and offered to stay with him. He said no, dropped me off at home, and went to the hospital. Later, I found out that I had fractured his penis. It was purple, and he couldn't touch it for a month. Despite everything, he was kind enough to text me and ask when he could see me again. Fast forward 4 years. We're still together. Story 44. I've never been on a Tinder date, but as a bartender, I've witnessed plenty. One regular, a tiny, rude guy, always brought his Tinder dates to my bar. He had a bad attitude and was aggressive toward the staff, which already set off red flags. His typical dates were average-looking women, and his behavior depended on how things went. If he liked them, he'd aggressively make out with them in the bar's dark corners, super cringy. If he wasn't into them, or thought they weren't interested, he'd sneak out and leave them with the tab. On several occasions, when a woman wasn't feeling it, he would get angry and verbally abusive toward her. It was so bad that we started warning women about him when they came in. One night, after a woman turned him down and left, he followed her onto the highway and began road raging. She called me in tears, asking for help. I told her to come back to the restaurant, where I had already called the police. She returned, crying and scared. He saw the police cars in the parking lot and drove off. A couple of weeks later, he tried to come back to the bar. I immediately confronted him, told him to leave, and warned his date that he was dangerous and she should stay inside until he was gone. He lost it, throwing a tantrum, and I had to physically remove him. Let's just say his head might have bounced off the front door on his way out. We haven't seen him since. Story 45. I tried Match.com when I moved to a small tourist town during the off-season and didn't know anyone. The dating pool was slim, but I eventually matched with a guy and went on a casual BBQ date. He was overly chivalrous, to the point of awkwardness. He insisted on opening every single door for me, including the car door, and even carried my food. I appreciate a gentlemanly gesture, but this was over the top and felt performative. During dinner, he mentioned how much he hated women on Match who weren't looking for a serious relationship. It was a big pet peeve of his. We ended up back at my place, started making out, and things escalated. Suddenly he said, "The condom came off." "Oh well, I trust you," and tried to continue without it. I had to stop him, which was a major red flag. Luckily, he respected my boundary, and we called it a night. The next day, we saw each other briefly, but I realized we had no chemistry. He didn't appreciate my sarcastic humor, and we had little in common. By day 3, he was already asking when I could meet his friends and family. I decided to end things kindly, explaining that we were looking for different things and I didn't want to waste his time. That's when he flipped. Captain Chivalry turned into a complete jerk, calling me a slut and accusing me of using him for a $9 plate of BBQ and a sweet tea. I blocked him and moved on. In hindsight, I consider myself lucky. Free BBQ, no baby, and no toxic relationship. Win-win-win. Story 46. It started on a Friday night. We were both out drinking, and she wanted me to pick her up from a party and go back to my place. Things heated up quickly, and we started having ACE. Then I noticed some blood, like she was just starting her period. She acted like she didn't notice. I was already in the moment, so I figured, why not? I finished, dropped her off at her dorm, and went about my life. A few days later, she called to tell me she had chlamydia. She had found out at the hospital while visiting with her parents, who thought she was still a virgin. At this point, my D was burning, and I realized she had not only given me chlamydia, but also blood D. She started texting me, guilt-tripping and blaming me, saying I was dirty and should have worn a condom. She even claimed she didn't really want to have S in the first place. Then it got worse. She told her parents she had been raped. Soon after, I got a call from a detective about a S assault investigation. I was terrified. I met with the detective, knowing my life could be over if the case moved forward. I kept thinking about the warnings from 6th E-grade SED about never having drunks because it could come back to haunt you. That's exactly what this felt like. The case was eventually dropped a year later, but by then, the stress and fear had taken their toll. I had fallen into drug addiction, overwhelmed by the storm cloud hanging over me. That experience messed me up deeply. I still can't fully trust people after what she put me through. Story 47. It was my first date after ending a 5-year relationship. The guy seemed enthusiastic, telling me, "I got you. I'm going to plan a great date." I thought, perfect, a planned date? This will be great. I dressed up, did my makeup, and arrived feeling excited. When I got there, I called him, and he told me to come up because he was finishing up at work. Odd, but okay. I went upstairs and he gave me a tour of his startup office while bragging about how much money he made. Red flag 1. We went down to his car, and I noticed he was parked in a handicap spot. I asked about it, and he replied, "Yeah, my bro got it for me. It's dope. I can park anywhere." Red flag 2, and I seriously considered leaving. As we drove, he asked, "So what do you want to do?" Confused, I said, "I thought you were planning this." He brushed it off with a passive comment and then suggested we get a bottle of whiskey and sit on a bridge. I declined, saying I preferred a sober driver, and suggested a board game cafe instead. At the cafe, he began nagging me relentlessly, calling me dumb and saying I had a little brain. I reached my limit, got up and said I had to leave. When I got home, he sent me a message saying, "Felt like we had a great connection. Can't wait to see you again."